Welcome to my lecture. I'd like to tell you something about food webs and how different organisms are interconnected. To illustrate how complex such a community structure can be and how a food web can be disturbed, I will focus on the ecological function of sharks in a coral reef. It is important to know how the community structures work in an ecosystem and what the functions of different organisms are, because the disturbance of food webs has often direct consequences for environment and people. Here I will focus on aquatic ecosystems, because the different organisms are stronger connected and more dependent on each other than in terrestrial ecosystems. I'll give you a short introduction about food webs and about the different categories that organisms can be divided into. There are very general rules and can differ depending on the habitat. Afterwards, you will see why especially the removal of so-called top predators can have severe impacts on a whole ecosystem. So, how does a food web work, and how do different types of organisms depend on each other? All organisms in an ecosystem need energy to live. The species that share a common habitat can be divided into primary producers, consumers, and decomposers. They can be arranged in a pyramid, where higher levels feed on the lower levels. That is called a trophic cascade. The position an organism occupies in a food web is called trophic level. On the basis of the pyramid, the lowest trophic level are the primary producers, like phytoplankton or seaweed, and they need only the sun's energy to do photosynthesis and produce biomass. On the second level of the pyramid, there are species that consume exclusively these primary producers. That means they are the vegetarians of the food web, the herbivores. In this example, this could be zooplankton or cockles. On higher levels in the food pyramid, the predators can be found. They are carnivorous and feed on the lower level organisms. Depending on the food web, 1 to 3 levels of carnivorous consumers can be distinguished. For example, lobsters and crabs as first-level carnivores and larger fishes as second-level carnivores. On the top of the pyramid, there's the apex or top predator. To be a top predator means to be prey to no other species, but to feed on all the lower trophic levels and balance the population of smaller predators as well as herbivores. But no matter on which trophic level a species is, when they die, they all get decomposed by small organisms that lead the nutrients back to the bottom of the food chain. In most ecosystems, the lower trophic levels consist of a variety of species and they are redundant in their functions. But the higher you go in the levels, the fewer species there are. The function of the top predator can be fulfilled by a single sort of species, as for example by dolphins or sharks. This leads us to the next question I'd like to address. How can a food web be disturbed? To disturb a food web means to kill or remove certain organisms from the ecosystem and thereby creating opportunities for others. Although most food webs appear to be well protected against overfishing of randomly picked species, they are susceptible to the effects of selective fishing. Some species seem to be more important to maintain the community structure in a food web than others. They maintain the ecological function, organization, and the diversity of the community and are therefore called keystone species. Remember what I told you before? The higher the trophic level, the fewer species there are. In such top-down regulated food webs, apex predators are such keystone species, because they have a direct or indirect impact on all the other organisms on lower trophic levels. Top-level predators in general have no natural enemies and populate the habitat only in small numbers. They have often a very low reproduction rate, and it takes a long time until they reach their reproductive age. Some sharks, for example, have only 2 young per year, and it takes up to 15 years for them to mature. That makes them very vulnerable to interventions like overfishing. In top-down trophic cascades, different trophic levels are limited by the next higher level. For example, in a simple system of 3 trophic levels: herbivores, first-level carnivores, and an apex predator. Herbivores are limited by the small predators, which are limited by the top predator. The removal of a keystone species can lead to the increase of one or several predators or herbivores, which subsequently extirpate several species with lower trophic levels. Okay, let's conclude what we have learned so far. Food webs are relatively robust to random overfishing because many species are redundant in their function, but they are susceptible to selective exploitation of so-called keystone species. Keystone species fulfill important roles in the regulation of the community and maintain the organization, diversity, and the ecological function in an ecosystem. The regulation of organisms on lower trophic levels by organisms on higher trophic levels is called trophic cascade. Examples for keystone species are the apex predators. Their removal often leads to an increase of other predatory or herbivorous species, which then extirpate their prey on lower trophic levels. As promised at the beginning, I will show you now how a food web could look like in a coral reef. I chose this example because coral reefs are the most complex and taxonomically diverse marine ecosystems, providing habitat for tens of thousands of associated fishes and invertebrates. Marine food webs are dominated by predators and not by herbivores, like it is the case on terrestrial ecosystems. Predator-dominated means that predatory organisms often provide more than 50% of the whole biomass in a marine ecosystem. The most abundant primary producers in a coral reef are phytoplankton and seaweed. They are consumed by the herbivorous consumers, which are predominantly zooplankton and benthic invertebrates. They again are prey for various carnivorous first and second level predators, for example reef fishes, bottom fishes like rays or flatfishes, and crustaceans. Some organisms feed on the coral polyps. Prominent examples of such corallivores are starfishes and even some squids. Other species are rather visitors than permanent residents, like herrings or other small coastal fish. Monk seals are also an important part of most reef ecosystems, and they are rather third-level predators, because they feed on a variety of fish and crustaceans. On many reefs, the migrating green turtles are frequent visitors. They are grazers and feed mostly on seaweed. This food web is highly interconnected, but most species mentioned here serve as prey for the reef sharks, which are normally found in a functioning natural reef ecosystem. The ecological impacts of eliminating top predators can be far-reaching and include the release of predatory prey populations from predatory control, which can lead to a rapid decrease in biodiversity. What indirect effects the removal of sharks will have on oceanic food webs remain unpredictable. We have only just begun to understand that many marine species that we use as a food source are highly dependent on regulatory functions of large predators. From reef habitats, it has been reported that the decline of large predators coincide with increases in coral-eating starfish populations and reductions in reef-building corals and algae. So, forget about jaws. If we want to preserve the marine ecosystems, we have to prevent the extinction of the sharks.